I guess we should introduce ourselves. My name is Jen Riddle, and I work at the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, and we have a network of over 250 nonprofit organizations around the country that provide direct legal services to immigrants.
My name is Jill Marie Bussey. I'm also an attorney with Clinic. I'm in the advocacy department. I'm also the chair of the board for a nonprofit organization that provides legal services to the immigrant community.
Hi everyone. My name is Pat. Can everybody hear in the back? Yeah. Okay, great. My name is Patrick Sorrell. I'm a legal fellow here at the American Immigration Council, and my work focuses very much on prosecutorial discretion programs like the ones that we're going to be talking about today.
So I just want to say welcome and thank you again to all of our esteemed embassy and consular guests. We're really thrilled that you've committed this afternoon to joining us to talk about changes to U.S. immigration policies. And I believe we have over 17 countries represented in the room, so that's very exciting. We are thrilled to have you because you and your consular networks are out there serving your communities. You are protecting the civil and economic rights of your citizens in the United States. You're helping them to thrive in the communities that they live in. And the changes that have recently been announced to immigration policies are going to affect many of your citizens in very profound ways. People who in the past were not able to work legally will now be able to obtain a work permit. Families who have lived in fear of seeing a family member deported will be able to stop living in that daily fear. And your citizens are going to come to you, they probably already are, to get information about what these changes are and what they mean and what deferred action is and how this can benefit them and is it safe for them to apply, where can they get legal services. And so our goal today is really to make sure that you have accurate information about what the recent changes to immigration policies are and for us to brainstorm and share best practices and ideas about how to implement these programs. And we're also going to look at immigration enforcement changes because we also know that an important role that you serve is to protect your citizens who may be arrested or put into detention in order to be deported from this country. So these are very important developments that we're here to talk about today. And I know there was a gathering, I believe it was last March, in this room, I believe, related to DACA and encouraging eligible youth to come out. And I'm just curious if you could raise your hand if you were able to participate in that discussion last spring about DACA. So a couple of you, 5 or 6 of you. So that's great, and I know there are many, many people in the room who are very familiar with DACA and have been working very actively on promoting DACA. So we don't want to bore you too much, but for purposes of people who may not be as familiar with DACA, we wanted to just start with a little bit of background on DACA and kind of how we got to where we are today and clarifying some terms. So we are using the terms executive action. We may also use the term administrative relief, and that's just referring to the changes to immigration policies that were announced on November 20th by President Obama. And how did we get here? Why did the president decide that he needed to make these changes? And that goes back to the fact that the U.S. immigration system has been broken for many years. There are many problems with the way the current immigration laws work. And they need desperately to be reformed. You may know that our Congress has been working to try to reform the immigration system for many, many years, over 10 years, and has failed time and time again to pass a new immigration law. And we know that Congress is really the only part of our government that can pass a law, that can create a legal status to provide to people, for people to get green cards. And we know that Congress has also failed to pass the DREAM Act, which was a more narrow law that would have granted a path to citizenship for undocumented youth who came here as children. In reaction to this political gridlock, dreamers, many young people in this country who are undocumented, built this really powerful movement that Director Rodriguez alluded to in his remarks, and engaged in activism and advocacy, and kind of the big victory was the creation of DACA in 2012 by President Obama. And after yet another failure in Congress last year in 2014 to pass immigration reform, the president came forward in November and announced that he would do what he could in his executive power to make some positive changes. And that is where expanded DACA was announced, expanding DACA to a larger group of people, and then DAPA, the new Deferred Action program for parents who have US citizen children or green card holding children. So how does the president have the power to do this? Well, we know that Congress is the one that makes the immigration laws, but the president and the executive branch is the one that enforces these laws. So as the enforcer of the laws, the executive branch has to make decisions about how to use its limited resources. It can't possibly deport all 11 undocumented individuals in the United States. And so it sets priorities about who it will focus its resources on. And with DACA, the executive branch was saying that young people brought here as children to the US are not priorities for deportation, and that they will be granted what's called deferred action. So just quickly to explain what is deferred action. Deferred action is basically deferring enforcement action. So it's deferring or delaying somebody's deportation. It is the government saying to recipients that they are not a priority for deportation, and they're not going to be sent to see an immigration judge, they're not going to be placed in detention, they're not going to be deported. Rather, they will be given lawful presence to stay here in DACA for 2 years. They can receive a work permit. With that, they can get a social security number. In most states, they can also obtain a driver's license. And they also have the right to apply for a travel document. So if they need to travel abroad to go visit a sick relative, or for an educational part of their studies or part of their employment, they can apply for permission to leave the US and be permitted to return. And then at the end of those 2 years, they can apply to renew their DACA. So what DACA deferred action is not, is it is not a permanent legal status. It is not a green card. It is not even a path to a green card. It is temporary. It doesn't provide any benefits to the person's family members, and essentially it can be terminated at any time in an individual case or even the entire program. So just really quickly, in order to qualify for DACA, I just want to review what the criteria are. And those are that somebody, when the program was created in June of 2012, somebody had to be under the age of 31. So it was intended for primarily younger people. People who did not have status at that point in 2012 and were here already in the US, and people that had been brought to the US prior to turning 16 years old. To get DACA, you had to have resided in the US since at least 2007, so you had to have been here for already about 5 years. And you have to be currently in school or graduated from high school or the equivalent of high school, which is called a GED, or have been honorably discharged from the US Armed Forces. And then you cannot have committed certain crimes or be otherwise a danger to society. So to apply for DACA, you fill out an application form, you submit a fee of $465, and you provide evidence that you meet all of these criteria. You send in your application, and you will get an appointment to go provide your fingerprints, and that is because the government wants to run a background check on people who are applying. And then hopefully within several months, maybe 6 months, you would get a decision, and you would receive a DACA approval notice and also an employment authorization card. That's valid for 2 years, and then after 2 years you can file to renew. So I think I will pass it on to Jill and Patrick to talk a little bit more about our DACA experience and what we've learned, and some of the more recent changes. Yes.
I just wanted to say real fast that Jill is replacing our friend Kamal Essaheb, who works at an organization nearby called the National Immigration Law Center. Jill is stepping in at the last minute, so we were, forgive us if we haven't planned everything, but we're going to sort of work our way through it. And our intention, by the way, is to leave a lot of time for questions and answers. I don't know if we're going to have as much time as we'd originally planned, but we'll save plenty of time for you at the end.
Thank you. Thank you for preempting that with my lack of preparation.
I also wanted to explain the lack of one of these for you.
I guess filling in for Kamal, I was to discuss a little bit about experience with DACA. I mentioned that I'm with Clinic, but I'm also the chair of the board of a nonprofit organization. I mentioned that so that you know that I've been on the front lines of DACA since the president made the announcement. So actually, I was at the AILA conference, and the conference room with many shedding tears of relief and just really emoting in the moment, feeling great hope that individuals would be able to become, more a part of the fabric of the United States, the place where they have now, made their home and really think of their only home. So I guess in looking at the experience, where have people gained legal experience or legal expertise in trying to obtain DACA and make the application process? And I can tell you where some people should not go. I really wanted to start with that because I really believe that embassies and consulates can play a large role in informing the citizens, your constituents, in being aware of the harm that can occur when individuals do not go to reputable legal or Board of Immigration Appeals accredited legal services providers. We were very fearful from the beginning of the DACA program that notarios here in the United States, which I know that term means something else elsewhere, but here in the United States, notarios typically refers to individuals who are not licensed to practice law. They would obtain services from the notarios, and in fact, there have been some predators in this environment that have taken advantage of families, taking their money and really impacting their cases in a very negative way, sometimes not even filing the case with the government, or potentially filing when that individual should not have filed, frankly. So we believe that providing education about where to find reputable services is incredibly important. And individuals are going to come to you, a trusted source, in terms of where to get legal assistance. Jen mentioned at Clinic, we have, I believe it's 250, almost 260 affiliates who are all over the United States and provide reputable immigration services. Some are BIA accredited, that's Board of Immigration Appeals accreditation. And that's the only way that you would be able to provide legal services if you do not have a law license. And then there is, of course, AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, has a wonderful directory of attorneys that are competent to assist in DACA cases. So that's the three places. One, please don't go to notarios. And two, the reputable service providers are either accredited through the BIA accreditation process, or they are attorneys, and we are talking about experienced immigration attorneys here too. And AILA maintains a wonderful list of attorneys, and in fact that may be something that as a consulate or embassy you may want to provide a link on your website, or have a directory of legal services providers in the area so that you are able to refer individuals to reputable services. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that, or is that? Actually,
there's one point, which is, sorry, actually, can you hear me without the mic?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just talk without it then. A colleague of Mark's actually did a survey of people who had applied for DACA. And something like 30% had applied at a group processing workshop, right? This is where a small number of attorneys and non-attorney volunteers will help a large number of applicants sort of through the application process. So 30% of the people that this person surveyed had gotten help in that fashion. Another 30 roughly % had gotten help through an attorney, direct one-on-one representation, sort of full-on service. And then another 30% had not gotten any kind of legal help at all. And so the point that I want to make to all of you today is that some of us in this room who do provide legal services or who have networks that do, we're never going to see those people. And so we're never going to have the opportunity to tell those individuals about these programs, about some of the risks, about some of the ineligibility grounds, about some of the problems that will happen if they apply and they're not eligible or they have certain criminal convictions. So one group of people that almost certainly will see them is you, working in consulates, because they're going to need to come to you because one of the pieces of evidence that Jen was referring to that you need to submit in conjunction with your application is a document that proves that you are who you say you are. So that can be a passport, that can be a matricula consular if your country provides such documents. It can be a birth certificate coupled with some identification in the United States. And so this population is definitely going to be interacting with you, even if they're not interacting with all of us. So there's a critical role that you can play in reaching them, in making sure that they get good legal help and that they don't fall into certain traps that that we want to make sure that they don't fall into.
Thank you. So that you brought up one good point about how many times individuals receive assistance with their application process through large settings, group settings. And one of the examples that I thought of, because Director Rodriguez mentioned, this great partnership between legal services providers and libraries. That is in terms of the New American campaign, but that also has been implemented in several communities, and that is a wonderful forum. Libraries are generally very trusted places for the community. Children get their books and their resource materials. Many families spend a lot of time in the library, at least I do, and I do not have any overdue books right now, but I can tell you my son's there frequently. It is a trusted place, and many times libraries provide English language training, workforce training. There's other embedded services in libraries. So where else, though, I challenge the audience to think about where else could individuals come to obtain information, if not assistance with applications, and perhaps partnership with the library or utilizing your own consular resources. You could hold information sessions to help spread the word, not just about the benefits of the program, but also to spread that word about avoiding the notarios and the predators out there. We were going to talk a little bit about how DACA has positively impacted the lives of those who have received the benefit. And I saw these wonderful statistics. I have seen some preliminary statistics. This is great to see the numbers even going up. 61% of DACA applicants have obtained a new job. That's wonderful and very empowering, I believe. 54% opened their first bank account. And particularly this younger population, learning financial literacy, becoming familiar with the banking systems in the United States, opening the first bank account, again, is a very empowering, wonderful benefit. And that is because, of course, individuals who receive work authorization associated with their DACA, they're eligible to get a real Social Security number. And that's, again, that can go very far, particularly in obtaining credit, which is critical here in the United States. 38% of the DACA applicants obtain their first line of credit, which is wonderful, or first credit card. And 61% obtain a driver's license. And as an individual who has served on the front lines as a service provider to individuals who have applied for DACA, I can't tell you how wonderful it feels to have a legitimate driver's license and to not live in fear of being in a fender bender and not having the proper documentation when those things do occur. And believe me, I was almost sideswiped coming here down here today. We know what DC traffic is like, but it is an extremely anxiety or extreme area of anxiety for many young individuals who don't have a driver's license. And so having that document and being able to obtain insurance on their cars, all of these things are extremely empowering for the population. The next thing that we were going to discuss is what's stopping individuals from applying. We heard from the director that there's a significant population that have applied for DACA, but there's also a significant population who have not yet. And we really hope that you'll take the message back today and help us to spread the word about the positives of applying for DACA. Those who, and I do hope that the director's comments at the end, Melissa had a very wonderful question for the director that I think spoke to this. What about the fear of what if DACA goes away? And I think the director answered that very well. There is really no history here in the United States for one administration to the next to make severe change. They typically adopt the policies of the next or the following administration. And of course, we would all love comprehensive immigration reform to occur. But in the meantime, there's no reason for us to believe that there would be a substantial change, regardless of what political party takes over in the future. The other thing that is stopping individuals from applying, and I can say again at the grassroots level, we hear this a lot, and is the fee. And Jose brought that up, the fee is hefty for a young individual who has not had work authorization in the United States, and it's not a penalty, but it is a substantial fee. And so, having individuals, again, getting their first credit card, opening their first bank account on renewals when they have to come up with the fee again, these things help. But the first-time applicant who has never had a bank account, maybe many times if they are working, many of their paychecks are going to check cashing places to, just the transactional fees. It's really hard to come up with those fees. So from my experience working at a grassroots organization, we found ways to try to assist individuals who cannot pay the entire fee or filing fee or a portion of the filing fee. We work with faith-based organizations that help to pay the fee for individuals. They may loan money to them, but the fee is a significant, I think, detriment or deterrent to those who are trying to come forward to apply. And again, I challenge the consulate embassies to think about how they may be able to assist their citizenry, their constituents in finding those fees. So that's, I believe, the main detriment. Fear, cost, we talked about, just not being aware of DACA, right? And we know that you can help us spread the word about the program. Waiting for comprehensive immigration reform is another reason that is cited for individuals not coming forward to apply. We've been waiting for comprehensive immigration reform in this nation for a very long time. I would encourage individuals not to wait for that. I don't know how else to say that, to respond to that. Other reasons are whether they don't know about their eligibility. Maybe they've heard about the program, but they haven't received the one-on-one assistance in terms of their eligibility. And again, holding forum with individuals who are able to provide competent education about the program can really help to address that issue. I know that we're short on time, so I'll move on. What do we know about the applicant pool? Predominantly, the applicant pool are from Mexico and Central America, and I think Mark's going to get a lot more into this data, so I'm just going to give some broad numbers here. Nationals of over 190 countries have applied for DACA, which is pretty extraordinary. 560,000, almost 561,000 applicants are from Mexico. Approximately 65,000 from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. One thing, again, that we saw on the grassroots level is that because of most of the DACA materials originally were in English and Spanish, there was this misconception that only DACA applies to the Latino population. That's not true. There's no one demographic. Anyone could apply for DACA who meets the eligibility criteria. We did not hear nationalities based in the criteria that Jen talked about. But I think that because only Spanish language and English language materials were available at the onset of the program, that may have made individuals think that they didn't apply or they weren't eligible. At the grassroots level in my community, we understood that there was a very large population of actual Haitian nationals and Korean nationals that were eligible for DACA, and we did a lot in terms of grassroots outreach to Korean churches, Korean societies that we are aware of. We took it upon ourselves to translate a lot of the materials. It took quite some time because USCIS had not yet translated the materials. And again, I encourage the consulates to think about that if there are opportunities to translate materials that help educate the population about this program. So DACA applicants come from every state in the United States, but the majority are from California and Texas. Applicants from all 50 states, as well as District of Columbia, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. So we have everyone in the United States from all jurisdictions applying. We have a significant amount of applicants, as I mentioned, from California and Texas, but also the three next largest jurisdictions are Illinois, New York, and Florida. And you may think about that, where in terms of you may have offices as well, if these are large populations. One thing that I wanted to mention is, yes, of course, I believe 93% of the applicants were from large metropolitan areas. There's a substantial amount of individuals who are in rural areas. And when I think about Director Rodriguez's idea in terms of the New Americans campaign, getting a mobile unit out, maybe that's what we need in order to reach those rural areas. Just here in Maryland, where I live, I guess we're in DC, but just right up the road to Maryland, the American Immigration Lawyers Association and several community members came together in the eastern shore of Maryland, which is very different from the western shore, that which is the DC Baltimore corridor. It's very much an agricultural area in the eastern shore, and we found that there was virtually no pro bono experience or expertise in the eastern shore, and we filled an entire elementary school filled with families. Hundreds of families came forward on one day when we did one outreach session for DAPA. And just think about that in one day, the power that you can have in terms of educating a population if you can have a wonderful outreach session of that nature. Moving on to the next part, we'll just, I think we'll move on to your part so we can get to that and allow for some questions.
Sure, that sounds good. Yeah. One of the other items that we were going to discuss briefly are sort of lessons for consulates and ways that you can help. And we've actually got a packet in the materials that you have in front of you. The document is titled Immigration Executive Action, How Consulates Can Help. So we have a list of suggestions for you, along with some basic information about some of these programs that we've been discussing. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the other materials that are in your packet, because we're not going to have time to get to everything today. And so there's some reading materials to address the things that we are unable to touch. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the more recent announcements. So now we've been talking quite a bit about DACA, the 2012 program that's designed to benefit immigrant youth. But as you know, last November, President Obama announced a series of changes to immigration policy. And that includes DAPA. And I know it's kind of, I remember when these programs were first announced, I said, I can't believe that we're actually going to have to say DACA and DAPA for the rest of our careers. So be it. Is that a new term to anybody in this room? Had people heard the term DAPA or Deferred Action for Parents of Americans? For who was that an unfamiliar term? Who had not heard that term before you came here today? Okay. Okay, all right, so I'm going to sort of take, I like to understand these things in their historical context. So we're going to back up a little bit. Basically, in the spring of 2013, the Senate passed a bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill. Perhaps some of you remember that. It was certainly getting a lot of media attention at the time. Then, moving forward, that bill, even though it passed pretty overwhelmingly in the Senate, it didn't make it to the floor of the House. Unfortunately, there's this thing called the Hastert Rule, which says that the Speaker of the House is not going to bring for a vote legislation that isn't supported by a majority of his party. And so John Boehner never brought the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill to a vote in the House, which is where it ultimately died. And when it did die, basically the pressure that was on Congress that had built up after the election in November of 2012 sort of shifted towards the White House. And that's the pressure that Director Rodriguez was just referring to earlier. So that pivoted towards the White House, and eventually President Obama announced that he had asked Jay Johnson, the Secretary of Homeland Security, to conduct a review of immigration policy to decide how it could be more fair, more just, and more humane, or I believe the words that he used. And so that review took some months. Pressure kept mounting. It involved actually some legal opinions being drafted both inside of the administration and outside, proving that the authority to make changes, the kinds of changes that the president ultimately made to our immigration policy, that authority existed. It existed in Supreme Court precedent, it existed within our immigration laws, and that's ultimately what the president concluded. So on November 20th of 2014, last year, President Obama made this primetime announcement that you may have watched. And just a couple of minutes after he started speaking on the DHS website, dhs.gov, they published a series of memoranda that explained in greater detail the kinds of changes that the president was announcing to that wider audience. And those changes essentially fell into three buckets. So first, there were changes to our legal immigration system. And when Director Rodriguez was talking about changes to naturalization and new initiatives to promote citizenship, that sort of is in that first bucket of changes to our legal immigration system. There's also new initiatives for high-skilled workers. What else? Visa modernization was that they sort of solicited proposals on that, and they're moving forward there. So those were sort of one bucket of changes. A second bucket were changes to enforcement policy. And there was this formation of a southern, a task force along the southern border to decide what our policy should look like down there. And there were changes to interior enforcement as articulated in this new enforcement priorities policy that you're going to hear a lot about later on today. Then finally, the third major bucket were the expansion of deferred action programs. So you've been hearing a lot about the original 2012 DACA program. So basically what the president ordered on November 20th was an expansion of that program and the creation of a new program that was like that one, but that was for a different population. So let me start with the expansion of DACA. So Jen mentioned that in order to have qualified for the original DACA program, a person needed to have been under the age of 31 on June 15th, 2012. So there were essentially people who were too old for DACA. If somebody was 33 years old the day that the president announced the original DACA program, too bad, so sad, you're out. And I think that there were a lot of people who questioned whether or not that was fair. And so what the president did on November 20th was eliminate the age ceiling. So no longer could a person be too old to request DACA. Assuming you met all of the other criteria, if you're 37 years old, okay, no problem. So that was one change. Another change to the eligibility criteria was advancing the continuous residence date. So if you remember, Jen said a person needed to be residing here since 2007 up to the present to qualify for DACA. Well, what they did on November 20th was advance that date to January 1st of 2010. So they moved it forward about 2.5 years. Now, that change, plus the elimination of the age ceiling, impacted an estimated 275,000 people. So those were the two major changes to the DACA eligibility criteria. But then there was a third change, and you heard Director Rodriguez talking about this quite a bit earlier, which was 3-year work authorization. So the original DACA program only had 2-year work permits, but the expanded DACA program called for 3-year work permits. And I think that's really significant because if you think about the cost-benefit analysis that an immigrant undertakes when they decide whether to apply for DACA, if they're only getting it for 2 years, that means they're paying $465 every 2 years. That means they're going to have to get their driver's license renewed. It just imposes some burdens on them that are diminished a little bit by an expanded period of deferred action. So that was a significant development. Then the other program, and I don't want to sort of bury the lead here because the other program was the one that really grabbed the headlines and was the sort of most significant, let's say, component of the president's announcement on November 20th, which was the creation of this new DACA-like program called DAPA. DAPA stands for Deferred Action for Parents of Americans and Lawful Permanent Residents. So parents, this is a program for parents. It's for the undocumented moms and dads of U.S. citizen children and children who have green cards. So there are certain other eligibility criteria. It's not for somebody who arrived 3 weeks ago. A person needed to have been living here since January 1st of 2010. And they need to have been undocumented. It's not an incentive for people to overstay visas. It's for people who, in fact, were out of status on the day that the president announced the program. In addition to that, and this is kind of an important piece, a person needs to not be an enforcement priority. So there's this whole separate policy that was announced that set forth new priorities for removal for the Department of Homeland Security. So if you want to find out whether or not you are eligible for DAPA, the first thing you do is you look to the eligibility criteria. Do I have a son or a daughter who's a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident? Have I been living here since January 1st of 2010? Am I undocumented? You ask those questions. Then you say, am I described on any of the priorities list? And you're going to hear a lot more about that shortly, but that's sort of the analytical process that you go through to decide whether or not somebody's going to be eligible for the program. That includes questions? Okay, all right, I'm going to wrap this up. So that's the DAPA program, and that's estimated to impact 3.7 million people. Again, Mark is going to give you the numbers in much greater detail, and including, one of the things that the MPI has done is put together numbers on breakdowns by nationality. So we should be able to tell you, probably not all nationalities, but some, how many of the people from your country potentially qualify for these programs. And with DACA, we also know how many have actually applied, at least for the top 20 countries of origin, many of which are represented here in this room today. So let me jump to the lawsuit that Director Rodriguez was referring to, and I'll try to keep my remarks very brief. But basically, within a few weeks, less than a few weeks had passed since the president announced these changes, when the state of Texas and eventually 25 other states filed a lawsuit seeking to permanently block DAPA and expanded DACA from taking effect. They wanted to essentially kill it in the crib. And they filed this lawsuit in the Southern District of Texas, where they got the judge that they were hoping for, and I think the case has worked beyond their wildest imaginations so far. Director Rodriguez described how on February 16th, a preliminary injunction was issued. So for non-lawyers in the room, a preliminary injunction is basically an order that applies to one of the parties in the case, requiring them to do something or not do something while a lawsuit moves forward. So the injunction that was issued in this particular case told the government, you have to stop. You cannot begin implementing expanded DACA or DAPA while this case is litigated. And the federal government, represented by the Department of Justice, has been appealing that decision in two different ways. So they're not only appealing the sort of preliminary injunction itself, but they're also appealing the decision of the judge to sort of let his decision go into effect while this appeal is happening. So there's sort of three tracks to the lawsuit. It's kind of confusing. There's the district court case, where the case continues to be in front of this rather conservative judge. There's the second track of the lawsuit, which is the appeal of the preliminary injunction. And then there's a third track, which is actually appealing the decision of the judge to let his preliminary injunction go into effect while this appeal is pending. Sorry, that was super technical. I hope some of you stayed with me on that. But let me say that among the materials that we've given you, my colleague Mark Nofri prepared this excellent analysis that explains basically the status of the case and some of the different arguments that are at play, and includes actually a discussion of the other lawsuit that's challenging executive action, which has not gone so well for the plaintiff in the case, which is Joe Arpaio, who you might know from Arizona. He's the sort of famous sheriff there who does very bad things to immigrants. I think that's the state of the lawsuits. So right now, the bottom line is that expanded DACA and DAPA are not in effect, and we could get a decision any day now that hopefully changes things, or it could take a long time. I mean, as Director Rodriguez is a far more experienced litigator than I am, and as he said, the only thing that you can really say in this context is not to make predictions about the timeline. So it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen here. There could be appeals all the way up to the Supreme Court. But I'll stop there and we'll turn it over for questions. What time is it now?
39.
Okay, all right, so let's see if we can address every single question in the room in 6 minutes. But if that doesn't happen, we can go a little bit over and see where we are.
One thing that I wanted to emphasize as you're thinking about your questions, we can bring a mic around, is that Director Rodriguez said if we get to go, that we're ready to go on expanded DACA immediately. And what does that mean to you? Jen mentioned in her presentation, that means that people are going to be coming and asking for documents. With the original DACA program, embassies, consulates, schools, various places, doctors' offices, were overwhelmed with requests for documentation because individuals need to prove they are who they say they are and that they have been in the United States for a period of time. They're going to be coming and they're going to ask for their documents, and that can put a lot of pressure on your resources. So that's what I encourage you to listen to Mark's presentation on the data to figure out where you are in terms of your representation of the eligibility pool. Questions?
Yes. Should we bring the microphone or?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I think. Hi, I'm the Consul General of Costa Rica. I have a question regarding the link that you mentioned. That would be, I mean, where can we get a link for the lawyers, the proper people to help our people? And, not just notaries or whatever, just like to put that link on our page.
Can we give 2 links? Number 1, educational material about avoiding and reporting scammers can be found at the FTC with multilingual translations. So really nice pamphlets. You can order those materials to have at your consulate in your native language to hand out to individuals who come through the door. They're like little pocket size. There's also novellas that have been prepared by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to make people aware of avoiding the predators out there and reporting that behavior is really important. In terms of where to find reputable help, there is a list, I believe, at adminrelief.org. You can spell that out because you know these.
Sure, so it's www.admin.relief.org. And that's a website that our organizations together put together along with some other folks in this room to inform the community. It's a little bit more aimed at legal service providers and other advocates about these programs, and you'll find that there is an excellent database there that's put together by Matthew Burnett, who's the next panelist actually, where they actually survey the entire country and find every nonprofit that provides legal services, immigration legal services, and they identify what kinds of services they offer, so you can search by specific immigration benefit like DACA and DAPA, and that's for nonprofits. For the private bar, you'll see on that website there's actually also a link to alalawyer.com, which connects people with private immigration lawyers that are affiliated with the American Immigration Lawyers Association.
Thank you.
Sure, and there's also a link, or there's information about it on your How Consulates Can Help page in your materials. Yeah.
That's a great question. Other questions?
I'm from the Consulate of Honduras, and the last thing that we knew about DAPA, it was that the form that they have to fill up, it will be some place that they need to go and send the forms. So we were told, they told us that we won't be able to fill those forms. So you know about that because it's regarding the DACA, they came to our consulate and we helped to fill it up. But with DAPA, we won't be able to do that.
So I think you're asking about the application form to actually apply for DAPA.
Yep.
And the answer to that's a great question. Right now there is no form. So the government, because the program is on hold because of the court case, the government has not even released an application form. So anybody who's spreading the word that they can help somebody apply now or fill out some form or get them on a list, that's not true. The government will release the form before DAPA launches, but it probably won't release it much in advance. I think in DACA, it came out a couple of weeks.
Oh,
No?
I think it was like a day.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So a day or so. So they do that on purpose, right? Because they don't want people to apply too early so it will be available on the USCIS website, which is uscis.gov. We don't know yet what the number of the form will be, but does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of misinformation about that, but right now the application form for DAPA does not exist. And same thing for the expanded DACA program. People can still apply for original 2012 DACA using the same form, but when expanded DACA starts, they're going to have to change the form to reflect the new criteria, so we will see a new form for expanded DACA also. And then I think you had a question, yes?
Yes, so I'm with the Embassy of Haiti, and we get a lot of questions as it relates to TPS and then converting or whether they qualify and that kind of stuff, like what overlaps, doesn't overlap. So we have a hard time answering that kind of question as it relates to these programs and temporary protected status.
So actually, USCIS did issue some guidance on that question, and it's a bad answer. It's not the answer that your nationals will want. Unfortunately, the answer is that if a person had TPS on the day that the president announced the DACA program, which was June 15th, 2012, then that is considered a lawful status, and you had to have been in unlawful status on June 15th, 2012. So your nationals who did have TPS on that day would not be eligible. Presumably that same logic would apply for November 20th of 2014, which is the date that people needed to be in unlawful status for purposes of DAPA. But the agency hasn't spoken clearly to that. I mean, the thing about these programs is that they are essentially, they're sui generis, right? That's the term that we use in the law for this. They are sort of their own creations, and the government is sort of free to adopt whatever rules and processes they want. And they shell out these processes and these their interpretation of this program on their website. There's a frequently asked question page for the USCIS, the DACA program. And that's where the answer to that TPS question is. And that's where we're going to be looking when the DAPA program starts. They're going to be providing all the clarity to answer to questions like that there. But yeah, so unfortunately for now, though, TPS is considered a lawful status for purposes of these programs.
One thing that I really appreciate that question about other status, because one thing that we've found in grassroots organization and getting information out to those who believe that they're eligible, many times people find out that they're eligible for another immigration benefit, a much better benefit than DACA, because really DACA is a last case scenario. If you could get a true benefit like a visa or residency, that's really what you want to go for. So having information sessions now is really helpful to ferret out those who may be eligible for other forms of relief. There's a question in the back, and that'll be our last question, I believe. Is that?
Okay, yeah, and then we'll be available all day for any lingering questions. So, please, Damien.
Hi, I'm from the Jamaican campus and I have 2 questions. The first question is the DAPA program, right? Can it be renewed after the 3 years? That's the first question. The second question is, are persons eligible for the same benefits such as social security number, driver's license, and a travel document, just like that?
Yeah, so there is language in the memo that creates the DAPA program about it being a renewable program, but since it hasn't even started yet, the government hasn't released any kind of, processes for requesting renewal. But that was the same thing with DACA. With DACA, they didn't announce the renewal process until very late in the game, actually. I mean, it was just a couple of months before people needed to start renewing. So hopefully they've learned a lesson there that they need to, communicate with the public earlier. But yes, in principle, it should be renewable, assuming it does go into effect. The other question about the sort of collateral benefits of the program, yes, so when people get DAPA, presumably they should get the exact same thing, so reprieve from deportation, work authorization, which enables people to get a social security number and a driver's license in nearly every state. They should be able to ask for advanced parole, which is permission to travel abroad, including to their home country, which many people have done. In addition to that, what are the other sort of key benefits that I'm missing? I think that's
Those are the main ones.
those are the main ones. Those are the main ones. All right, those are the most significant.